The exec committee went a little longer than I expected. I'm Jim Hovland. I'm your chair, Mayor of Edina, and I'm going to call the meeting to order. It is the Transportation Advisory Board meeting to the Met Council. It is February 15th, 2023, about 12:40 p.m. And first thing we're going to do is, we don't have a, see, we should approve the agenda. Approval of the agenda, and is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second, Geisler.
All right, thank you. Got a motion and a second on approval of the agenda as shown. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the agenda as shown, say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Do we have anybody with us from the public who wishes to speak to the tab about an item of concern to them? Okay, seeing no one coming forward, we'll move on to chair reports. As I mentioned, we had an exec committee meeting preceding this meeting, and had a couple of interesting topics of conversation beyond the agenda. I won't go into the agenda. We'll be handling that in due course. Talked a little bit about some of the advantages that might be out there for us from a competitive standpoint with IIJA. Member Mike Barnes from MnDOT raised the possibility that there may be some grant opportunities we can take advantage of as a region. And so we kind of strategize on that on a sort of global basis as between the state, the region, individual counties, and cities. So more to come on that, and we'll maybe try to get one of the consultants here that helped MnDOT look at some of the opportunities that were out there and have a conversation around that. It may evolve into a situation where in the regional solicitation, we may want to do like what we did with innovation funds, is set some aside for grant possibilities. Member Geisler made this suggestion, and then if we don't use it, just have it roll back into the regular solicitation. So more to come on that. And then we had a conversation briefly about how the meeting ended with respect to our vote on the regional solicitation last time, and some of the, I think, emotion is still around some of that issue. So now from the welcoming new members standpoint, Mark Jenkins. Mark, welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. He's the citizen representative for TAB District F.
All right, so I've been engaged with transit with the Twin Cities since I started on the Gateway Corridor Commission, maybe a decade ago, when that started. I've been active in just being a citizen representative in the East Metro. I'm on the 3M Settlement Commission as well, and this opening came up, and I had just stepped down from 12 years on Maplewoods Housing and Economic Development Commission and wanted to stay engaged.
Yeah, good to have you here. Thank you. All right, and then Torrin Gustafson, citizen rep for TAB District F. It's an alternate, not here today. Frank Kalash, MPCA. Frank here?
He's not here.
Okay. And Jess Robertson, I saw your name tag here. Jess, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, good morning. I'm happy to be here, or good afternoon. My gosh, I don't even know what day it is. It's a miracle I got here today. I'm a council member in the city of Blaine. The city of Blaine has tried to be a strong advocate for infrastructure and transportation needs in the North Metro. I've been an alternate on this board for the last 2 years. Now my colleague, who's now a county commissioner, Ms. Julie Jepson, has been here serving the North Metro really well. We've, again, tried to be an active voice for transportation infrastructure needs in the North Metro. I'm on the Highway 65 Coalition. It engages communities from Columbia Heights all the way up into Hennepin County. Again, just, I think sometimes a lot of us on the North Metro don't feel that we get the attention that we need. We don't have a strong public transit system, and sometimes our infrastructure needs seem to fall into the shadows a little bit. So we're happy to be here and be a voice and an advocate for those north of 694.
All right, thanks, Jess. And then you've got an alternate too, Tom Newland, who I assume is not here.
Tom Newland is not here today. He's also one of my council colleagues. I'm going to do my best to be here, and that will ensure he won't have to be.
All right, and then Mayor Stephenson, you've got a Maple Grove alternate, Judy Hanson.
Yeah, she is on the city council and also an attorney with the city of St. Paul.
Okay, good. A couple other things I can report out on. Last month, I was at the U.S. Conference of Mayors midwinter meeting in Washington, D.C., and two things there, I think, of significance of this group. I'm the vice chair of the Standing Committee on Transportation and Communications, and so the Mayor Denver is the chair. The Denver Mayor, Michael Hancock, and I, and then the Mayor of Hoboken, New Jersey, and Evanston, Illinois, got invited over to a meeting with Pete Buttigieg at USDOT. And so the four of us went over there on Friday morning of that week and had a really nice hour and a half long session with him on a variety of topics, including one he's concentrating on now, which is that Vision Zero, reducing traffic deaths across the United States. So that's something that has a significant emphasis for him. And then I made a presentation at our standing committee on the kind of the highlights of the Twin Cities regional effort around transportation equity since 2014, and got some great help from staff on getting me prepared for that. So those were two things that occurred for me last month, and I think explain in part my absence here. Also want to announce the vice chair selection and the tab liaison. Mark Winshuttle Mayor Mark will be the first vice chair, and then Trista Modis Castillo will be the second vice chair, and then Peter Dugan has indicated his willingness to serve again as a tab liaison. So those appointments were made within the exec committee. And now I'll turn back to Mike Barnes. We'll go to agency reports. I'll go to MnDOT. Peter.
Yes, Mr. Chair, may I introduce my
Member Dugan.
alternate for Dakota County, Carl Grotning? Again, Carl's our alternate, and I understand he was on the tab, so we have some great experience here. So I think I'll be absent. No.
Yeah, very good. Thanks for being
Take
here.
the day off.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, you're welcome. Let me go to Mike Barnes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple items. Hope everybody is enjoying their nice February rain. It's quite the weather we're getting this year with doing snow, cold, and all the rain. Hopefully you got here safe. We'll keep trying to keep as many plows out that we can. So a couple items with this. I think Sheila, when I was missed last month, did highlight a little bit with the quarters of commerce. Right now where it's at is the packages that were submitted, they're getting the final cost estimates, support letters. They're all due in by March 1st, and then they'll be evaluated and announcements in May for that funding. It's the couple $100 million funding for the quarters of commerce, and about half of that being here for the metro area. Fatalities, I'll send out, like I do to Elaine, the kind of the updates on that, but right now where we're running is about 20 fatalities so far this year, which is just a couple less than last year, so that's good that it's less, which is better than it was during the COVID timeframe, but still 20 more deaths than what we want here in the state. So again, we'll send that information so you get a chance to see a little bit more about that. We just had, since our last meeting, I don't think Sheila highlighted, but we had our large 494 project that's down near the airport and between airport and Highway 100. That was let near the end of January, and it came in about 10% over. So we're still letting it, but have to shuffle around. So that's kind of a little bit of an indication. What we've had in the past was most of our smaller projects were probably coming in close to that, but our bigger ones, we didn't quite see that. But being a multi-year project and a bidding environment and or inflationary side of it, I guess we should be probably happy with that. But anyway, that project is let, and so you'll start to see. And then there's also on 494 down on the other side from the airport, a bridge rehab that'll start getting work done on the piers here this year too. So there'll be a lot of work down there. You'll see some work next meetings here in the spring on 94. The second half of that bigger project. So we'll be having our construction kickoff here in a couple months. So then there'll be announcements of how we're going to slow you down for the summer statewide here. So that's all I have, Mr. Chair, unless there's questions.
Thank you, Member Barnes. That report prompt any questions from any
Mr. Chair,
other members? Yeah, Member Dugan.
May I follow up? Which piers, which bridge is gonna have piers starting?
And the 494 just east of the airport, that'll have the bridge pier. It's gonna be a couple-year project. It'll be, it's a bridge rehab project, but we'll start this year with the work underneath on the piers, so.
Okay, east of the airport. Okay, thank you.
Good. We don't have anybody from the MPCA with us today, so no report from them. And I'll turn to Carl Crimmins, Member Crimmins, to report out on the MAC.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple things to report. 22, a lot of statistics, but in 22, we had 31,242,000 passengers at MSP. The biggest surprise was the international passengers. In 21, we had 740,800 international passengers. In 22, we had 2,039,809 international passengers. And daily aircrafts were up from 741, we're up to 756 daily airport air flights. And then in a lighter news, MSP was ranked number 3 among the 20 largest airports in the United States by the Wall Street Journal. So we seem to get a lot of awards, which is very nice, but I think the staff does a heck of a job. And then to let everybody know, there's going to be a 3-year construction project inside Terminal 1. It's just started, it's already started now. They're going to upgrade and modernize the whole Terminal 1 building. They're going to start in concourse F and D will be first. It's going to be carpet, drapes. You know, we've done bathrooms and we've done concessions and things, but so this is going to be all the general items that you experience as you're going through the airport. It's been a while. Terminal 1's looking a little old, so they thought they would fresh it and modernize it, and it's going to take 3 years to do this. So, but again, the reason it takes 3 years is that we don't want to slow anybody down traveling. So naturally, a lot of the work has to be done at nights, weekends, and non-peak times. You know, morning is a very peak time for the airport. So we'll probably hold off and start working sometime near afternoon. But we'll do the best they can. And Delta is going to be a big partner. 71% of the flights out of MSP is Delta. So they're going to be the construction managers on the project, because a lot of the terminals that we're remodeling and modernizing are going to be theirs. The jetways down to the airplanes are going to be replaced and renewed and everything. So it's going to be quite extensive, but I think everybody will enjoy it once it's completed. And that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
They will. Yeah, I've been thinking that carpet is ready for replacement.
Yes, especially when you see when they have to replace one carpet square.
Oh, yeah.
And it stands out, it's like a target on the floor, you know, so.
All right, good. Thanks for that update. That cause any questions from members? Okay. All right, and then TAC Chair, our Metropolitan Council member, Deb Barber. Member Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I've got a couple of things today. The Metropolitan Council began listening sessions with transportation partners as we initiate work on our 2050 Transportation Policy Plan. The listening sessions are part of an engagement process that will provide recommendations to the council for the plan's goals and objectives. The focus of the current listening sessions are really to get feedback on the current transportation policy plan, so we can use that as we help inform sort of what works, what doesn't work kind of approach. Our first session was actually held last week in Scott County in Shakopee. I loved my commute, and walking 2 blocks was fantastic. But I think we had a great session, and we had heard a lot of good dialogue from the county commissioners down there. So very appreciative for hosting that session down there. Additional sessions are planned with each counties and with cities, tribal governments, and other stakeholder groups, including the suburban transit providers. So many of you will have opportunities, I'm sure, to participate in these meetings. The council also reported on 2022 year-end ridership this week for the region. The council delivered over 42 million rides in 2022, an increase of over 6 million rides from 2021. Express services rebounded in 2022 on a percentage basis. I'm sure you'll hear from my suburban transit provider report as well. They do remain below pre-COVID levels on a number basis, but we are seeing some progress in the right direction. Metro Metro Mobility delivered 2 million rides and returned to over 80% of pre-COVID ridership for 2022, and Metro Mobility was closer to 90% in the second half of the year. Regional transit rides totaled 46 million, 42 million from council services, 2.2 million from the University of Minnesota, and 1.7 million by the suburban transit providers. Russ Rapid Transit continued to grow with nearly 3.5 million rides in 2022. Metro Transit has seen ridership grow which is 43% over 2021, and now comprises almost 10% of council ridership. And so just a reflection on the investment that this group has made in ABRT, you can see that. Specifically, talking about the launch of the Metro D-Liner to BRT in December 2022, Metro Transit has seen ridership growth in the corridor, especially on weekends. With the D-Line, the corridor is nearing pre-COVID levels on weekdays and has already exceeded the ridership on weekends. So very, very positive news on that side of things. The last thing to report on is, as you know, we're in the process of going through appointments for new council members. The place we are at right now is finalists have been forwarded those names to the governor, and now we're just waiting for the decision, which is required by March 6th. So we're just sort of in a holding pattern right now.
Thank you, Member Barber. Any questions for Member Barber? Member Geisler?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Member Barber, do we know the ABRT lines that are coming in and the positive impact or negative impact or any impact on the connecting lines? And are those increasing ridership on the various stops that intersect with them along the way?
We do have some of that information. I don't have it right at hand. But like we're seeing, like say on the D line, which replaced by and large the Route 5, we still see some ridership on the Route 5, which actually is, holding as well. But I can get you some information probably on the collateral connections, but there's definitely some of that because especially I think when you look at the ridership increasing on the weekends, which is something I find very interesting. People are going to places along those corridors, so that would actually be an interesting study just in itself to find out where everybody is going to, because they're clearly not just using it to get to work or to school. They're going out and using it for other reasons.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Good. Other questions? Member Barber? All right. Let's move on to Member Hanson and the suburban transit update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of updates. I mentioned last month that Southwest Transit is partnering with Lyft to provide additional on-demand service within an app environment. And that is nearing implementation. It's expected to be rolled out soon to riders. MBTA is planning some spring service changes coming this Saturday. Nothing major, but focusing on refining routes and stop times to respond to customer needs. And MBTA is also finalizing a RAISE grant application for Burnsville Transit Station Mobility Hub Project. And they have kicked off discussions with Dakota County Technical College around a dedicated route concept, workforce development partnership, and on-site electric bus infrastructure. For those who might not be familiar with the RAISE terminology, that's Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity. So also wanted to mention that a couple of weeks ago, the Suburban Transit Association hosted a successful legislative breakfast at the Capitol, several legislators attending, as well as a few Metropolitan Council members. We had a good discussion on STA's legislative priorities for this session, focusing on funding needs for technology and safety modernization. So that is my report.
All right, thank you. Member Hanson. Questions for Member Hanson from anyone? All right. Thanks, folks. Next, we're going to move on to the TAC Chair report, and Jenifer Hager, who is just about a new TAC Chair. This is her second meeting, I think, reporting out to the full tab. And she's got a couple things that she wants to cover in her TAC report, and then we're also going to have her guide us through the consent and some of the non-consent items. So, Chair Hager, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, members and Chair. The TAC Exec Committee did discuss, there are 2 scope change items on the agenda for you today. They were on the tax agenda as well. And we did discuss having our Funding and Programming Committee review our current scope change policy. just to ensure that it adequately addresses the situations that project sponsors are currently dealing with as they're delivering their projects. The current policy is about 10 years old, so we just want to have that review done, see if there's any recommended changes or amendments that the committee might make, and bring that forward once they complete their review. So that's the extent of my.
And I think you were also going to, just for folks, as a reminder, and also for the new people on the tab, talk a little bit about streamlining.
Oh, yeah.
How does that work? What's the purpose of it?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was going to cover that later next to the agenda item, if that's okay. with
That's
you.
all right. You can cover it before we hit the streamlining items.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Does that completes your chair
That
report?
completes the report, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Stand by, because the only thing we have between you and you coming back is the approval of the minutes. So is there a motion to approve the minutes of January 18, 2022?
So moved.
Second.
A motion second by the mayor on approval of the minutes of January 18, 2022. Any further discussion? Yes. Member Crimmins?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, but you keep saying 22, but 23.
23, excuse me. It's written 23 here, 22. Yeah, thank you, 18, 2023. All right, any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes of January 18, 2023, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. All right, thank you, Member Crimmins. Now we're back on the consent agenda portion of the agenda, and we've got several items there that Chair Hager is going to talk about, and the first couple are those Streamlined projects.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. So there are two Streamlined TIP amendments for the 2023 to 2026 TIP, and there are 3 program year extension requests on the consent agenda. For the TIP amendments, we're really looking for 3 requirements. We talked about this last month, but I'll keep reviewing. We're looking for fiscal constraint, consistency with the adopted regional transportation plan, and opportunity for public input. A streamlined TIP amendment, because you're going to see some of these include scope changes and differences in costs. And later on in the agenda, you're going to see some additional scope changes, and you might wonder why some are streamlined and some are not. To be a streamlined TIP amendment, the TIP amendment must be consistent with the TPP, not a regionally significant project, and not part of a formal scope change itself. So the 2 agenda items that are later on the non-consent agenda are items that are formal scope changes. The 3 that you're going to hear about here with these streamlined TIP amendments are informal or administrative scope changes. So if there's any questions, let me know. But we have 2023-13, which is a streamlined TIP amendment for 3 new projects, and we have 2023-14, which is a streamlined TIP amendment for related scope and cost changes for 3 existing projects. In 2023-13, where the 3 new projects are, it's the travel behavior inventory, which is TAB has a long-standing history of funding the TBI. It was originally funded in the 2022 to 2026 TIP in 2022, but prior to the end of the state fiscal year, the 2022 funds were transferred to the FTA in state fiscal year 23, so we need to amend the TIP accordingly. The next one is the addition of funding for preliminary engineering on an intersection grade separation project on Trunk Highway 13 and Nicollet Avenue in the city of Burnsville. The intersection grade separation project was recently awarded federal funding through the regional solicitation. The funding for the preliminary engineering is federal funding not associated with the regional solicitation and needs to be added into the TIP. And adding a new project line for MnDOT's Highway 65 pavement rehabilitation project to accommodate early development of crossover construction and drainage. The funding is National Highway Performance Program funding and comes via an equal reduction in the primary pavement rehab project. So there's no new funds in the TIP, it's just splitting those out so that MnDOT can move forward with that early work. Are there any questions on 2023-13?
Questions for the chair? For Chair Hager on that matter?
Okay.
All right.
In 2023-14, these are the 3 project scope and cost changes. So there's a Hennepin County request to change the scope for their Hennepin Avenue Bikeway project. The proposed scope change undoes a TIP amendment that the Met Council approved late last year. The Hennepin County Bikeway project originally did not include bus rapid transit platforms for the Metro E-line. During project development, local funding was added to construct those bus rapid transit platforms. The projects coincide geographically. The earlier request to remove the transit platforms from the project description and now add them back in as a result of ongoing coordination between the project team, the FHWA, and the FTA, and the NEPA process, and the environmental documentation between those two federal agencies. The second project is a MnDOT request to change the scope and reduce the cost of their Highway 62 Mill and Overlay project in Mendota Heights. The project length will drop from 1.35 miles to 0.74 miles, and the scope will focus on shoulder repair and installing guardrail. The total project cost will drop to about $2.2 million, and the project funding is that NHPP, the National Highway Performance Program funding, and it's not regional solicitation funding. And the last one is a MnDOT request to reflect the cost increase for their US Highway 212 rehabilitation project. The $4.8 million cost increase will be covered by MnDOT, again with NHPP funding, not regional solicitation funding. So both of these streamlined TIP amendments meet those three requirements of fiscal constraint, consistency with the regional policy, and the opportunity for public input through these committee meetings.
Good. Any questions for Chair Hager on 2023-14? All right, let's move on to 2023-08.
Okay, the next three agenda items are all program year extension requests. When evaluating a program year extension request, the request is reviewed against the current regional program year policy, and a checklist is completed to determine how much progress has been made on a project. A minimum score of 7 is required for that program year extension to be recommended for approval. Program year extension requests by the current policy are for 1 year. The project sponsor must deliver the project in the following program year. However, federal funds may not be available until a later time. So for these projects, the program year extension requests that you'll hear today, the projects will be in line for federal reimbursement in 2028 unless federal funds become available sooner, and project sponsors understand that as part of the process. So 2023-08 is a program year extension request for the Hennepin County Midtown Greenway Access Project. The request is to shift from program year 2023 to 2024. The project was awarded regional solicitation funding in 2018 and proposes to construct a new ADA-compliant access to the Midtown Greenway. Hennepin County is making the request in order to provide additional time for community engagement, which was hampered by the pandemic and the civil unrest in the 2020-2021 timeframe. The project did score 8 points on the staff analysis, and so it's eligible for the program year extension. And both funding and programming and TAC unanimously recommended approval of this item.
Any questions on 2023-08? All right, let's move on to 2023-09.
Is a program year extension request for another one for Hennepin County for their Vernon Avenue Bridge project. The request is to shift from program year 2023 to 2024. The project was awarded regional solicitation funding in 2018 and proposes to replace the Vernon Avenue Bridge over the railroad. Hennepin County is making the request in order to coordinate design and construction of the bridge project with an interchange project led by the city of Edina, thereby reducing the overall impacts to the traveling public. The project did score 8 points on the staff analysis, so it is eligible for the program year extension, and both funding and programming and TAC unanimously recommended approval.
Questions on 2023-09? All right, thank you. 2023-10?
2023-10 is a program year extension request for the city of St. Paul and their Kellogg Bridge Replacement Project. The request is to shift from program year 2023 to 2024. The project was awarded regional solicitation funding in 2020 and proposes to replace the Kellogg Boulevard Bridge from Broadway Street to Maria Avenue. St. Paul is making this request in response to supply chain issues and cost concerns. The project scored 10 points on the staff analysis, so it is eligible for the program year extension, and both funding and programming and TAC unanimously recommended approval.
Thank you, Chair. Any questions on 2023-10? Is there a motion to adopt all of the items discussed 2023-13, 14, 08, 9, and 10 on the consent agenda in a single motion?
Move approval.
Second.
All right, very good. We have a motion and second to approve the items described on the consent agenda in a single motion. Any further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. All right, good. Thanks for that good work, Chair. And then we'll move on to the non-consent portion of the agenda. You've got some of these items here as well, or actually all of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. 2023-07 is setting performance measure targets for pavement, bridge reliability, system reliability, and CMAC. And if we could get our friends in IT to put the screen up so you can actually see what those targets are proposed to be. The MPO must adopt system performance targets for pavement condition, bridge reliability, and system reliability, and for areas not in air quality attainment, a target for congestion mitigation and air quality must be set. The proposed performance targets are 2- and 4-year targets for the 2022 to 2025 period. Met Council and MnDOT staff have been coordinating, and the recommendation is to adopt the statewide targets for pavement condition, bridge reliability, and system reliability. And there was a separate conversation regarding congestion mitigation and air quality targets for the region. The TAC did recommend adoption of the recommended performance targets. And I'll just note that when you're looking at the system reliability target here, it is impacted by pandemic era data. So as traffic patterns continue to stabilize in our next normal here, those targets will kind of flesh out over time. But we do anticipate still being able to meet that target. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take those, and we do have Dave Burns here with Met Council staff to help assist as needed.
Have any questions on tab members on 2023-07, which establishes these new targets in a post-COVID environment? I think we need to update this information. So, all right, is there a motion to adopt 2023-07?
So moved.
Second.
All right, we got a motion and a second to adopt Action Transmittal 2023-07, which is a request to adopt the PM2 pavement and bridge reliability targets and the PM3 system reliability and CMAC performance targets for the near future. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. We gotta amp up the level of enthusiasm here somewhere. Okay, 2023-11. This will really get them going, this cable barrier thing. I mean, just the word barrier has got people's attention, so.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. The next two items are scope changes. A scope change happens when a project sponsor proposes any revision that changes the physical characteristics of a project and has the potential to add or detract from the project's benefits to the region. So these scope changes are coming through the formal process, which is why they're not reflected as a streamlined amendment item. When a scope change is proposed, Met Council staff will complete an analysis of the proposed changes, including the merits, the overall benefits or reduction of the benefits to the region, and how the change may have affected the original project scoring to get an idea of whether the score may have dropped, may have increased, or stayed about the same, and how that would have compared to the other projects on the list at the time the project was selected for funding. So for 2023-11 is a scope change for MnDOT's Trunk Highway 13 Cable Median Barrier Project. MnDOT is proposing to change the length of the project by removing about 1.3 miles from the original 2.9 mile project length. The cable median barrier for the 1.3 mile section that would be removed would be installed as part of two other projects, meaning the overall safety benefit of the project is still going to be accomplished. The project was awarded about $425,000 in HSIP funding in program year 2024 as part of the 2020 solicitation. The current project funding is $490,000. And HSIP is a 90-10 match program, so the cost estimate for the portion of the project proposed to be removed is about $201,000, $181,000 of that being federal. The request is to approve the scope change with no change in the awarded HSIP funding, given that the full project will be delivered, albeit not as a single project. For this project, even with the change in project length, the total project score would not have changed much, as length does not factor into the scoring measures for HSIP itself. Both funding and programming and TAC unanimously recommended approval with no change in the HSIP funding for the project.
Any questions for Chair Hager on 2023-11? Yes.
Yes, Member Jenkins. And this is probably as much informational for me, as this is my first meeting, but in the letter from MnDOT, they state that they are, let me pull up the exact language. They are committed to install the cable median barrier funded with a different funding source later during the construction. Is that in lieu of the HSIP funds, or is that if they do not receive the HSIP funds?
Mr. Chair, committee members, I'm going to look to Mike Barnes to help here, but I believe that is in relation to, I mentioned that the project would be delivered in coordination with 2 additional projects.
Right.
Coordinated projects, and so I think that's where the funding difference comes in.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members, if they're keeping the HSIP in to use it now, then whatever we would have been doing, we'll use whatever funds that we can put together, whether it's state, federal funds. So we're just basically saying we'll use the HSIP funds on this one, and we'll make sure we're funding the next piece, so.
Okay, so does that mean then, and I'm sorry.
Yep, Member Jenkins, go ahead.
Does that mean then that the HSIP funds will be the, I'll call it bonus, for lack of knowing the correct lingo, will be used for something else, since you're using a different revenue source for the barriers in the future?
With this one, the funds would be used on this first project. So the 400,000 would be used, and then, because there's more from a safety aspect that you can use, so it's not just the barrier. They'll use the funding in this project, and then we will just cover whatever was not in this one by different funds, so.
Okay.
So it's still using the funds, not a bonus. You actually used up the HSIP funds that was there by breaking it out. We're just ultimately funding the other part later. So it's, a lot of this becomes timing out of stuff. You know, in other words, we weren't going to try to break that apart and put that later, because then you gotta use the funds in that specific time frames.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Jenkins. All right, any other questions for Chair? Yeah, Member Martinson.
Do we want to add, thank you, Chair. Do we want to ask Chair Hager to speak to the issue of the money being left with the original awardees, and as kind of a standard practice that is done here, just for our edification?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. So in the current scope change policy, there is guidance that talks about when a project scope is introduced, if there's a reduction in project elements, there could be consideration in a reduction in the funding that matches the reduction in the scope. But it doesn't give specific direction on when to do that or why you would do it or not do it in some situations. That's one of the reasons I've wanted funding and programming to take a look at the policy and determine if there should be more guidance applied to that. Recent history, and I'll say recent because it's probably maybe the last 5 years or so, shows that these scope changes have been coming through, and if the full project benefits are being delivered, even not with the original project, but kind of through a coordination effort with adjacent projects and efforts, that the funding has remained with the project. There is, you know, you can't go over that 80-20 maximum for funding on the project, but if there's capacity there to keep that federal funding there, the project benefits are still being realized. That has been what has happened in recent history.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Member Martinson. Other questions for Chair Hager on this matter? Is there a motion to approve action transmittal 2023-11, which would involve a scope change to reduce the project length of MnDOT's Trunk Highway 13 Cable Median Barrier Project in Burnsville?
So moved.
Second.
Member Martinson moves. Member Mayor Williams seconds. All right, any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. All right, now we're on to the big one, the fish hatchery. This will really get revved up. Talking fish hatchery now.
All right, 2023-12 is a scope change for St. Paul's Fish Hatchery Trail Project. St. Paul is proposing to remove slope stabilization from the trail reconstruction project. It was determined that the proposed slope stabilization will be ineffective because the issue is due to deep underlying soil conditions and more extensive repair is needed. So instead, the slope stabilization will occur as part of a future MnDOT project along US Highway 10/61. So MnDOT really suggested that the city pursue this scope change. The project was awarded $2.2 million in federal funding in program year 2023 as part of the 2018 solicitation. The current project budget is $3.3 million. The federal funds require an 80-20 match. The cost estimate for the slope stabilization is $324,000, $260,000 of that being federal. The request is to approve the scope change. For this project, it's unlikely that the change would have resulted in the project not being funded. So both funding and programming and TAC unanimously recommended approval of the scope change. Those actions are silent with respect to the federal funding, implying no change in the federal funding for the project.
Questions for Chair Hager?
Yes.
Member Jenkins?
Mr. Chair, thank you. So, by the way, as someone who rides that trail frequently, my question is, and there was nothing in the letter from MnDOT on this, putting off the stabilization, is that going to delay the trail improvements till 2027 or 2028?
Mr. Chair, member, I believe the answer is no. It's just coming later.
Okay, so there will still be trail improvements, it's just the reinforcement that's being delayed?
That's my understanding, yep.
Okay.
Any other further questions? All right, is there a motion to approve 2023-12?
Motion to move. Second.
Right. Motion by Commissioner Amadas Castillo, second by Member Jalali. With respect to the motion as stated, 2023-12, scope change approval for the City of St. Paul with regard to the slope stabilization issue at its Fish Hatchery Trail Stabilization Reconstruction Project site. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of action transmittal 2023-12 say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. All right, that takes us through the action portion of our agenda, and now we're going to move on to the informational items, and we're going to get a transportation policy program plan update from Cole Henniker. And then we're going to talk a little bit of regional solicitation with Steve Peterson.
Good afternoon, members of TAB. And these two are really important conversations to go together, so that's why we brought them as a package deal today. I am going to talk about the 2050 TPP, where we're at with the project and what we've been doing over the last six to 9 months, and then what 2023 will look like in terms of the products we plan to produce as we move towards adoption in 2024. So I wanted to remind you all that, TPP, planning for a long-range plan, is not a once every 10 years process. It's a cyclical process. It's continuous. We're always trying to learn more and new things about what we think is important to the region. So the transportation planning staff, we're always doing studies. Some of these you've seen, some of them you may not have seen yet. But really that ongoing process is accomplished through a lot of the studies that we've been doing for the region over the last 5 to 10 years, and as well as ones we're actively doing now. So a couple of examples here of studies that we've completed, and then a few examples of ongoing studies that we think are getting at some of the issues we need to know more about. And I'll talk a little bit more about these later on. So those will all inform the 2050 TPP. So you'll see when I get into what work have we been doing so far, it's kind of grounding the members that are participating in this process in these studies, what we plan to do with them and what we hope to get out of them, without really getting into the implications to the TPP, because that comes this year. Here's a quick schedule overview. As I said, those contributing studies are an ongoing piece that'll contribute right up until adoption of the TPP. We have been talking a lot about the Regional Development Guide, which is the higher level visionary document that the council produces that helps guide all of its system plans, including water resources, parks, and transportation. So that project is advancing slightly ahead of the TPP, and so we've been spending a lot of time talking about that. And we're just starting to get into some of the formational concepts for the TPP around policies and goals and objectives, but again, in the very early stages. So this year, a lot of our focus is going to be starting to produce real content, chapter drafts, actual text for different stakeholders to react to, likely focused in the second half of the year, but spending this first half drafting the content and reviewing it internally. And then, as I said, the public comment process will occur through the majority of 2024. We anticipate this currently coming to TAB, I believe in May, don't quote me on that, 2024, going out for public comment, and then coming back to the TAB for approval in the fall, late fall. So that's the outlook for this next year. A reminder on the structure that we have in place and why you're not seeing the TPP regularly, since it is such an important document. This committee has a lot of work to do. Of course, you do a lot with the regional solicitation. So we did create a smaller TPP advisory work group that includes members from TAB. It also includes more additional members from the Met Council and some additional representatives from state agencies or transit providers. So I just wanted all the TAB members that sit on this group, if you want to raise your hands, do you all know who you are? Good. So we have a good mix of city, citizen, modal reps, and county reps, as well as some agency reps. I will say we have two members that are not going to be coming back. Francisco Gonzalez, a Met Council member, has left his district, so we're going to be reappointing a member there. And then, of course, member Jepson was promoted? I don't know if that's how you look at it, but moved on to Anoka County Board, and so we are looking to fill that Blaine seat, and we'll work with the chair, because he's been the one facilitating the city representation on TAB to fill that open seat. But this group has met 3 times. They're actually meeting again this Friday, and so they're talking at a lot of the policy issues. Correlated to that, we have a TPP technical group that meets monthly. It includes membership from all of TAC Planning, which is our typical committee that works on regional planning issues, but we add some membership to represent some additional perspectives, like more freight representatives, more transit representatives, just so that we get a complete picture of the region. So these groups have been the primary groups talking about the TPP. I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but just a text slide that kind of covers what I've said here. I will just note that a lot of the work at the advisory work group this year is going to be focusing on setting that regional vision, goals and objectives that are so integral both to how we invest in the region, how the regional solicitation invests in the region, and what we all can say we have shared outcomes we're all trying to achieve. So that is going to be a lot of the work of that advisory work group this year, probably starting in April and May. A couple of terms, I'm using terms, you guys might not all know what we mean by them. So the Regional Development Guide has some new structural terms that they're producing. The values are core beliefs that the council, how the council carries out our work. So things about how we work, not necessarily the outcomes we hope to achieve, things like partnership, collaboration. The vision is an overarching description of what we want to achieve for the region. So these are almost like your elevator pitch for what the region hopes to achieve. And then the goals get into more specific issue-oriented outcomes that we hope to address for the region. So those are at the Regional Development Guide level, that big picture development guide. At the Transportation Policy Plan level, we're going to have goals, which again are those statements about what we hope to achieve, but specific to the transportation system. We currently have 6 goals in the 2040 TPP. We're revisiting those, looking at where we need to update those as we speak. And then we also have objectives which state even more specifically, how are we going to measure that and what's the kind of measurable outcome we can say we want to achieve within that goal. And there may be multiple objectives for each goal. A new topic this time around are policies and actions. Previously we've had strategies. We're going to a little bit more of a hierarchy approach where the policy is a big picture statement about how we plan to achieve the goal. And then the actions are going to be, what's the role of different agencies in helping us as a region achieve those goals. So the actions will be specific to the actor and specific to the policy that they're trying to achieve. And so those are all in development, early stages right now. So again, reminding you, what have we done to date with these groups? And again, this is primarily focused on what that advisory and technical working group have seen. We've talked about the 2050 Regional Development Guide. The council just earlier this month talked about the regional vision, and they informally signed off on these 4 cross-cutting statements that are on the screen today about the regional vision. Equity, climate, natural systems, and public health, safety, and well-being. They are more elaborate statements in the draft that was produced, and we can share that with you offline. But this is the starting point for the vision. There's going to be more engagement on that. But we're going to take this and start developing those cross-cutting regional goals as well as the transportation-specific goals. So we've had a few different discussions about these cross-cutting issues within both the advisory and the technical working group. And in that group, we use things like small group discussions, as well as some polling tactics to try to get as much input as we can. As I said, we're also working in that policies and actions development. You can imagine we're not reinventing the wheel here. We have a lot of strategic approaches that we already do as a region. We took the existing strategic approach from the 2040 TPP, and we tried to put it into these new buckets of policies and actions. That was phase one. That's really the easy part. You know, what are we already doing that everyone kind of agrees we should keep doing? The next phase is what we're starting now, is identifying gaps, or new policy areas that can help us achieve the new outcomes that we hope. So without having new goals, we're sort of in that brainstorming stage right now, particularly with our technical working group. We just shared a request with all of the members to get feedback on something like 36 different policy statements. And so we're getting really detailed feedback at this point. And then once we have those new goals and objectives, we'll be going into the phase of how do we actionize these goals? What are some new policies or strategies or actions we need to put into place to help get at any new goals that come about? The final phase is, you know, if we end up with 100, that's far too many. We want to consolidate and really prioritize which policies and actions are most important for the region so that we have a very concise strategic approach that everyone can understand and buy into. So that's the phased approach for policies. The box one there is highlighted because that's what we're just completing, but we've actually started to move into phase two at this point. So as I said, we've talked a lot about transportation studies as well. We've introduced a few studies. Again, topically, these are studies that we think are issues that we need to understand a lot more about. E-commerce freight distribution, you know, how does freight move within the region, and how is the different e-commerce trends affecting the region's freight movement? We have a study going on about transportation climate change measures and how do we measure that better. This is going to tie very directly into anything that the solicitation wants to do to try to evaluate the impacts of projects and climate change. We also are doing a VMT mode shift study. So the idea there is looking at where is there potential for people to shift modes based on observed travel data. So we go into the travel behavior inventory, you know, a project that you all fund. We look at trips that reasonably, given some basic criteria, could have been done with a mode other than driving, just to get a sense for what is the potential for mode shift in the region. And then a TPP goals and objectives study, which I'm going to talk a little bit about later. We've also discussed a few projects that are a little bit more further along. We don't just talk about the council's work. We brought in MnDOT to talk about the SNTP, the statewide plan, as well as the statewide highway investment plan. And we've talked about the council's climate action work plan as well, which was just wrapped up late last year. So a lot of work to talk about, but we're starting to get that into what does this mean for the TPP in 2023. Just wanted to touch briefly on scenario planning. We are doing some scenario planning exploration as part of the 2050 Regional Development Guide, and this is focused on development scenarios. So we generally have an approach to develop forecasts for the region that are based on existing land use plans and past trends, and we're calling that the business as usual case. I think you can all acknowledge we're not really in a business as usual trend anymore. Things have been very thrown off by the pandemic and other factors. So we were looking at what are some different futures that might occur and how should we react to those if they were to occur. We'll still have a standard forecast for the region, but these are just to help us understand what some potential risks in our systems and our plans are. So the different scenarios are high regional growth and low regional growth. For the last few years, the region has actually experienced very little growth, whereas in the past few decades, we're growing pretty rapidly. And then we look at, well, what if we just explode in growth? Well, let's say climate change floods the entire East Coast and everyone wants to move to the safe upper Midwest. That would be a scenario that would really impact our systems. We just don't have a plan for that type of growth. And then, of course, there's dispersed versus compact. If growth was occurring at much lower densities on the fringes of the region majority, what would that look like versus a lot more redevelopment-oriented growth? At this point, we're still in the exploratory stage. We don't have a story to tell you all yet, but that is something that we're going to be bringing forward in the next couple of months, looking at different metrics and how they impact our systems. So I already covered the 2023 look ahead in terms of goals and objectives, the policy and actions, and then drafting outlines and chapters. The goals and objectives will really be the focus of the advisory work group where some of the TAB members sit. Those policies and actions and chapter outlines will be more of the focus of the technical working group. We're into a really detailed review of documents that are many pages long. And so that's, if you have staff on those committees, you might just let them know. We have presented this to the staff committees as well, but just a heads up there. So, and I did want to touch on really quick this 2050 TPP goals review and engagement. We hired a consultant to help us look at the goals for the TPP and look towards 2050. The consultant's not producing a set of goals and objectives. That's for the council to do in collaboration with all our partners. But they are talking to all of our partners to get a sense for where they're at. So they're both producing a theme synthesis of regional goals from all the county plans, a select number of city plans, and then they're also looking at statewide plans like MnDOTs and Met Councils and peer region plans as well to see if there's anything we can learn that we might just be missing from what our other regions of our similar size are looking at. But the big focus of their work is actually doing engagement. So they have 15 listening sessions budgeted. I think we're actually up to 16 now. We're meeting with all 7 county boards. We're meeting with cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, and we're having 2 city open houses. They're actually next week, the 22nd and the 23rd in the afternoon. So we sent out announcements to every city in the region at the staff level to invite them to participate in that. And then we're meeting with MnDOT and FHWA. We're meeting with the Minnesota Freight Advisory Committee and suburban transit providers. So we have a good stakeholder cross-section, and then we're actually supplementing that with some equity engagement with a separate consultant. The focal point for them will probably be meeting with tribes and some community organizations that typically have engaged with us when developing the TPP, as well as some other organizations at the community level that give us more of that on-the-ground feel. So this is a big effort, and this is the focal point right now. Most of these stakeholder listening sessions are happening this month and in early next month, and we expect to bring some early themes to the advisory group for the TPP in March or April. So that'll be really that start of what should the 2050 TPP goals and objectives look like based on what all of our partners are saying as part of that process. And there'll be a summary report produced, and I think it might be helpful once we get all that complete to come back to TAB and talk to you all after the advisory work group's seen that. So I would say that's more of a summer update for you all. So with that, would welcome any questions, and I know if there's questions about how this relates to investment, we might want to let Steve present too, but would welcome any questions on my presentation.
Yeah, we'll see that linkage soon. Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you. Great presentation, Cole. Thank you. How will performance measures and regional outcomes associated to this, how will it be integrated, and how are you going to make sure that we're also collecting data and do the evaluation part as part of the planning?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members, we do have a transportation system performance evaluation that is a look back. So and that should be coming out really soon, and we can see if there's time in your guys' calendar to get an update on that. So that really looked at what did the 2040 TPP say we want to achieve and how well did we do. The next step after we produce goals and objectives, which is that policy level, is to go to the technical staff and say, how can we best measure these statements of goals and priorities that the policymakers want? And then establish those measurements, and we do 2 things. We track measures over time. Sometimes we try to model them to say, what are our investments actually going to do to influence those measures? Modeling is more of an art than a science these days, so sometimes it's not perfect, but I think that performance metric setting stage is post goals and objectives sometime this fall, and we'll be working a lot with the technical staff to develop that.
Mr. Chair, if I might follow up.
Yeah,
I would just encourage you to maybe consider doing it as part of forming the performance measures. I think it's really important to make sure that as we're doing the planning, we know what we want to get out of it. And so I would actually encourage the members of the committee to make sure that you're putting that in part of the plan from the get-go so that we know that investments policies are working and improving our transit system as we expect. So
Yeah. Yeah, and just one more thing to add too, and this will, again, relate to Steve's presentation. We have a lot of experience measuring a lot of things in the regional solicitation, and the staff around the region have a lot of experience with that. So we're going to definitely lean on that experience to help us with that.
Other questions for Cole Jenifer? Cole, on slide 9, you talked about e-commerce freight distribution study. I was wondering how you were going about doing that work.
Well, we do have a consultant hired, or soon to be hired, I should say. And so they're going to be bringing in some expertise from nationwide, and I don't have a full depth of understanding of the scope of that one right now, but I think we can bring it back, and there could be a potential info item for TAB. I believe it did go to the advisory work group. It might have been a meeting that you weren't at, Mr. Chair, but we can double check on that.
Okay, all right, yeah, I was interested in what the interaction or engagement was with the private sector on that, as opposed to just looking at, using a consultant or looking at data in the abstract, but.
Yeah, I think it'll be a mix of both.
And I'm thinking that we've got, what do we have, we have the largest logistics and freight forwarder in the country here, right in our backyard, in C.H. Robinson, and, and then you've got George Schember's former employer, Cargill, actively engaged in all kinds of freight distribution. I think it would be a mistake not to engage the private sector on looking especially at the e-commerce aspects of it.
Yep. Agreed.
Member Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to let my fellow TAB members know that all of the work, especially with the regional development guide, some of these things are still changing even as we're speaking. So there's already been some tweaks to and changes to the cross-cutting issues and the visions and value statements. So this work is kind of ongoing. So we're doing the regional development guide as we're doing the TPP. So if you've got questions or you see different things displayed different places, just let me know and I'll connect you with the most recent version of things. But there's a lot of activity going on in all of these. So it's a large focus right now of our committees of the whole when we meet. So often if you want to get a good update, that tends to be a good meeting to listen into if you want to see kind of where the remainder of the council is looking for that regional development guide piece of it.
This might be for Member Crimmins. I was just thinking about, there's another group that's working on the issue of how much freight, that's air freight, moves out of here on a nightly basis to Chicago to be shipped internationally by air, so that we can figure out whether it makes any sense to be doing some of that air freighting right out of here. So that's another issue that's looming out there. And I don't know whether that has relevance to what we're going to be working on TPP-wise, but keep that in the back of your mind.
Well, Mr. Chair, I can say, there is a lot of statewide freight efforts currently underway, and we are plugged into those. And I think those kind of cross-state boundary freight issues tend to be more handled at the state level. We plug ourselves in, make sure that we're coordinated. The specific study we were looking at is about internal circulation of freight within the region.
Within the region?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, folks, that prompt? Yeah, Member Crimmins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just since you brought up freight, last year we moved 236,450 metric tons of freight out of MSP. So that had to get to MSP for us to do it. So that's how much freight's on the roads today.
Yeah. Yeah, so, and if you want to expand that business, I think some of us are concerned about the fact you've only got 19 acres that you haven't developed out there. And how much room is there? We might need to be thinking about going down to Rosemount.
We're all full.
For a freight airport. All right.
Well, and to that point,
Conversation for another day.
A reminder that at some point we will be bringing the MSP's long-term comp plan in front of TAB later this year. So I think they're close to a draft, is my understanding.
All right, thank you. All right, Steve, a little segue into you here. It's a appropriate blending of work that's ongoing.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, this is first the policy and then the programming here, and how the two interact is kind of the purview of this committee. So 3 items we want to talk about today, and first is the surveys that many of you filled out. Second is the 2024, that's the next funding cycle for the regional solicitation. And then we're already thinking about the 2026 cycle, so the next 2 cycles of funding, and then also the survey results. So we surveyed TAB members and many others involved with the regional solicitation. We got 15 replies, so I think that's a win out of 34 members to get that level of response. And the next slide looks at what some of those maybe key themes were across not just TAB, but then the rest of the stakeholder groups. And the first three, certainly more came from TAB about modal distribution, geographic distribution, and several members wanted more updates during the process, the funding scenario development process, and even the scoring. Others have said they want maybe less updates too, so we'll maybe try and provide some opportunities offline for people that want to deep dive on some of these topics to make sure that they can kind of contribute fully at the TAB level. So here's a good slide to pass on to others. Slide number 3. This is the next, the calendar for the next cycle, 2024. So when we overlay 3 different things over the next 3 years, the TPP, the 2024 cycle, and the 2026 cycle, and look at your time available and when we might bring things to you for approval. We did see a few kind of pinch points in that process, and that's alluded to on the slide here. And so our solution to that is to advance the 2024 cycle up by 4 months. That would put an open application period being this fall, starting the September-October timeframe, closing in early December, with funding scenarios being next spring, and then a TAB decision roughly July of 2024. And so if you look at the blue box there, it kind of provides the rationale for doing so. One of them is the TPP. We want you to spend a lot of time on that next winter, next spring. That will go out for public comment, which gives you some more time to dive into the funding scenarios for the regional solicitation. And then it doesn't put those approvals on each other in the fall of 2024, both the TPP and the regional solicitation. Too much on your plate and our plates as well, so on both sides. So anyway, this advancement, I think, is something we've brought through all the committees, and also trying to get the word out to other partners that maybe don't have a rep on our committees to start preparing for that. So in doing so, we're hoping to have kind of very few or a limited.
Steve.
Just real quick,
Yeah.
does the TAB have any say in this? I mean, if the majority TAB members said, no, this isn't gonna work for the groups we represent, and we're still trying to sort out federal funding streams and grants and criteria, or is this a done deal? This is what we're doing?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. So I think if there was a tremendous amount of pushback from the TAB or partners about the schedule, we'd revisit it. We think that the existing schedule does not work. And so that we put forth maybe 3 or 4 options internally to kind of play them out, how things overlapped. And many of them advanced the solicitation even more than this. But after hearing from some partners, we didn't think like a summer solicitation would be doable from our partner standpoint. So trying to push it back to the fall and working with our TAC chair and our other committee chairs, they thought this was kind of a reasonable, kind of maybe middle ground to not overlap too many things on top of each other.
Commissioner, would you articulate in a little bit more detail your concern?
Well, in talking to staff members, they're pretty concerned about this, and.
Dakota County staff members.
Yeah, and it's a lot on top of each other, and, I mean, it just feels like from on high, and none of the alternatives were presented to TAB, or somebody else might have a better idea. I mean, I was just curious, the process, whether we have any say in it or not, so.
Yeah, and maybe just to further a few things that are later in this PowerPoint. The other thing that's overlaying here is the 2026 regional solicitation evaluation. That's a 3+ year consultant study that will start this summer. And so even from a keeping everything straight standpoint, having 2 overlapping regional solicitations didn't make a lot of sense from our standpoint, from our kind of vantage point. To try and kind of decouple those as best we could is part of another reason why we advanced the cycle here 4 months.
So, Commissioner, are your folks down there, your staff level folks, thinking that they'd like to see some change with respect to the scoring, or are there other aspects of it?
Well, I guess it's probably not a good use of time to belabor it in this meeting. I'm curious as how set in stone it is.
All right, well,
some people are still trying to figure out what the heck happened in the last solicitation, and in order to prepare what they're gonna move forward for the next round. It just seems really quick on top of all the other things coming with federal money, other grant programs. I mean, your assertion, the people of the 65 projects that didn't get funded, that they could just be resubmitted, if you weren't successful or you scored very poorly, it probably, number one, doesn't sound like a good idea if you're an applicant, if you already lost. And number two, do we want a bunch of, and I don't take this personally, anybody's project, but do we really want to just see a bunch of losers re-up again in the process? Wouldn't we want a little bit of time for some development of some winners in new projects, if you will, so.
All right, well, here's
It's very simple.
I'm going to go to
simplistic
Member
in
Barber,
its
but here's a
terms.
suggestion. We let Steve finish his presentation, and then we're going to have time for a conversation. So, Member Barber?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I did check, and it sounded like from the conversation at TAC, there wasn't concerns about the schedule. And I think part of it is the understanding of, right now, we're working, we just talked about the current TPP versus the new. This would be under the current, where otherwise, if we move things out too far, you're submitting applications under the framework of a new TPP, which you don't know what it is yet. And so we're trying to balance those two things to make sure that we're working in the right framework for both of them. I think so there's more knowns throughout the process. It is a little more accelerated, but I think in the context of how we at council have to adopt these systems plans, like the transportation policy plan, it allows TAB to really kind of rely on what we've built up to this point under the current TPP before we kind of change everything.
Okay. Chair Hager, would you come up for just a moment, please, and just, you've had this conversation at the TAC, I'm sure. So just maybe it's as affirming of what Member Barber is saying, but
Yes,
since
thank
you're
you,
the
Mr.
chair of the
Chair.
TAC, it'd be good to hear it from you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. It was presented to TAC last month, and there really was almost no conversation about it. TAC was unusually quiet last month, so that was striking to me that I thought there would be more conversation on this. I myself did review this with staff in some of our meetings, and I had significant concerns over an earlier schedule that would have had us applying in the summer. And I expressed those concerns, and that's where this was kind of adapted and pushed back towards the end of the year, which I'm more comfortable with. I do understand the workflow coordination that Met Council is trying to accomplish with this schedule change.
Okay, that's helpful.
And I think to be
Commissioner, go ahead.
fair, this conversation was held in conjunction with the ability to tweak criteria in the solicitation project process. So if you were an entity that was unhappy with some of the criteria or the results, you put those two things together. Are we going to have an accelerated process and no opportunity to tweak criteria? You're just having a second round of something in which a fair share of people had concerns with.
Yeah, it was good questions. And let's have that conversation when Steve's done. Thank you, Chair Hager.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we'd be certainly willing to reach out to Dakota County staff too and hear a little bit more about what they're thinking on that too. So put that offer on the table. So next is the 2026 cycle, and we're looking for your input on some of the maybe high-level tasks going into what we're calling the regional solicitation evaluation. And the main point of that study effort is going to be to try and bring in the 2050 TPP and the 2050 Regional Development Guide into our funding processes. So here's a few high-level scope items, starting with the before and after study. What did we get over the last 10 years since 2014, where we did a big reevaluation? Looking at other peer MPOs across the country and people that were involved with some of the before and after studies we've done over the last 5 years or so, that was maybe yielded some good learning on our standpoint on what other MPOs are doing and from a cutting edge standpoint. Incorporate the goals of the TPP, looking at everything from should we do a 2-year solicitation cycle, a call for projects, simplifying, we heard that loud and clear in the surveys, and then obviously engaging with a variety of stakeholders through that 2 or 3 year process. Skip that slide. So we did want to ask the group what in general, if they thought about this scope, and this is the same kind of questions we asked to the other groups, do you think we're kind of hitting the mark on maybe some of the big questions that we want to get answered? And certainly it's more than just right here, but you know, some of these questions, some of the things that came in the survey, and other things that are brought up are really what's forming the scope of work for the consultant over a 3-year time period. So with that, Mr. Chair, I think I'll turn it back to you and see if people have questions either on 1, the surveys, 2, the 2024 cycle, or 3, these key tasks for 2026.
All right. Questions, comments? Yes, Member Martinson.
So I apologize if this is overly esoteric, but I like what I see here, but I feel like there are a couple of gaps of things. And I guess what I would like to do is maybe suggest that I really like the goal of tying back what's done here to the regional guide plan for 2050. And what I don't see in moving from the sort of the vision, you know, the goals to the action steps is necessarily what I would call a theory of change, or a discussion of what the mechanisms are whereby certain actions are going to lead to changes towards the goals that we're trying to accomplish. Now, those are the standards that I used to be held to when I was writing federal grants for doing public health research. If I didn't have a theory of change and I wasn't discussing what the mechanisms were, I wasn't getting the money. So that's the background that I'm coming from, but I think it would be helpful in these kinds of things to be asking the consultants, how do you see these actions that were being proposed? How do you see those leading to the kinds of changes and outcomes that we want to see? So it's not a critique of what's there, it's just saying, I'd like to see something else added to what's there, I guess, if that makes sense.
Sure, I think I'm tracking that, thank you.
Here, Member Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just sort of a comment again, there's this regional development framework that is sort of the umbrella over all of this, and a lot of that kind of, I think what you were talking about is there. And then as we build out the goals for the transportation policy plan, then it becomes the strategies where we get to the details where, you know, how can we do these things and these strategies to actually achieve what we're doing up here. And, you know, a combination of that is doing the look back we're doing right now on the 2040 TPP, building out vision statements and sort of the cross-cutting issues that we're looking at for the 2050 regional guide, which a lot of those themes are things we've talked about here, where it's equity, leadership, accountability, stewardship, with lots of ties to climate change and some of those fundamental issues that we've been talking about throughout our discussion here. I think we're at this funny point where everything's sort of starting and they're not all connected yet, but I promise you they will become connected. It just takes some time. And so that's, keep asking the questions, because we said we're having these discussions at council on the regional development guide right now. And it does tie into this, but I think it really ties into that strategy. So what are you really gonna do to change the things up here?
Yep. Thank you.
Member Geisler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Member Martin, I agree with, you know, we should be connecting these things. I would even like to just see a simple, here are the scoring metrics we use, and here is how they're connected to the regional development guide, to the plans that are out there, and why our weighting supports the plan. Just a simple connection of what we already do with what's already there to highlight, to say, okay, we're talking about safety in the development guide and or here. This is why we've weighted it as such. And I think that would help us at least start down that path as a governing body to understand why we've emphasized certain parts of the scores versus others. Every category is different, so it's going to have different answers for each one. But I think that would give us a little bit of a guidebook to start saying, okay, hey, we're really overemphasizing something that is not a significant part of the development guide or the current TPP or the future TPP. And so I think that would help us decide point allocations, which is really where we actually make this change happen, and our criteria, or we can decide, well, we have a criteria here that doesn't connect to anything in the guide. Why are we weighting this? And that gives us a better conversation starter.
Member Barber, and
Just a
then
quick-
Cole, come on up.
A very, very quick comment. This sort of highlights the conversation we were having with Commissioner Holberg about the timing of the schedule, because you're building one regional solicitation under one TPP versus another, and why we've kind of moved things up. So we're not connecting to something in the next version that doesn't, there's no way it can align. So that's really kind of the struggle we were trying to navigate with that.
Cole, Henniker, and then Elaine.
Steve and I should be locked arms in all these presentations. So I just wanted to address, because one thing we have done in the TPP as part of that policies, and as Councilmember Barber was referencing, we looked back at the 2040 TPP. You will see regional solicitation come up probably like 40 times in terms of our existing implementation of our current TPP. So one of the tasks I'm hearing is Steve needs to also say, was there any solicitation criteria where we didn't point back to the TPP? And we can kind of show that mismatch. But we're definitely doing that analysis, and we can bring some of that forward, I think. But it's a combination, because the policies and actions are going ahead of the regional solicitation overview. But to your point, Member Martinson, they should be setting up regional solicitation overview. So that's why we're bringing these together for you all to discuss, to see that connection. So appreciate that discussion.
Very good. Thanks for that clarification. Elaine.
Actually, I want to say Steve will probably bring it next month to TAB as part of the introduction. There is a table relating the Regional Development Guide, Thrive, the TPP, and our criteria and measures. So that table does exist. But we can review it and make sure everything coincides. But I think they do.
Yes, yep, that is, people that have seen the introduction document to the application, 10 years ago when we did this large reevaluation, again, that was one of the tasks that we did. It's not as clear as it should be, though, and that's part of our aim of this next study.
So we can take a look at that table and see what could be revised in it to help.
Member Barber, then I got a question for Steve.
Very quickly, and one of the things that I hope kind of comes out of this is when we look back at the 2040 TPP, did we miss anything? And then we're planning strategies for the next one. We know the places that we have to build in more.
Steve, for I don't know if you can answer this or not, but for 2024 solicitation work, what are we talking about in terms of potential availability of federal funds, the dollar amount?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think we're going to be at somewhere around $250 million available.
Okay.
And
So for those of you that are relatively new, historically, we've had about 200 million to work with. And then this last solicitation, we had about 300 million to work with. Now we'll have projected 250.
Correct. And that's kind of before some of these other special pots like overprogramming or protect or carbon reduction, and it kind of depends on how some of those play out too. But the base level is the Surface Transportation Program and the CMAQ. That for 2 years, that's $250 million.
Yeah. So, when you read the survey results and the concerns that were expressed there, and you kind of highlighted some of the top line issues, and Commissioner Holberg's comments are held by others here. It just makes me concerned that we're going to spend $250 million using the scoring system we used last time. And is there some way that we can do, even if it requires extra effort from the TAB, without putting extraordinary stress on you, because we already realize we're in a compressed environment here, that we can take a quick look at this again, and then look at it relative, as we talked about in the exec committee meeting, look at it compared to what the goal was of the IIJA around that three-pronged approach involving greenhouse gas reduction, public safety, and the third element escaped me, but just so that we're aligned all the way down. I mean, we're using U.S. taxpayer money here, but there were goals in mind federally. There are goals in mind here. How do we all get comfortable with the notion that for 2050, and maybe some folks already are, that for 2024, excuse me, not 2050, 2024, we've got the right sort of evaluation system in place?
Right, those are some good questions, Mr. Chair, and we will, when I say minimal changes for 2024, I mean kind of rewrites of large sections of the application. Things that we've heard it from the technical committees thus far are things like scoring changes. If you want to put more emphasis on safety or this or that based on either federal guidance or performance measures that we've seen come across the last 2 months, and Chris kind of mentioned the same thing, that's probably the biggest area of change for the 2024 cycles, how you distribute the points in our existing system. And it's an easy thing from staff's perspective to change that, and has a big impact on likely what's coming out in projects.
So that's something you are going to do, and you're going to come back to us and ask us if we think it's a good idea or not, or what?
Well, so Mr. Chair, in the surveys, we heard several items. Safety was one of them, greenhouse gas emissions is another one, are maybe the two themes we heard from a points perspective. Tomorrow at funding and programming, we want their help in developing some options to bring back to you on scoring changes. Yeah. I mean, you can get, I think, the broad level guidance can come from this committee.
We've got technical people at two levels here, at the TAC level and funding and programming level, that can help give some immediate guidance.
Yeah, to bring back some options for your consideration, I think we need the help of the technical folks to get there, particularly on the scoring, and plan to do that starting tomorrow.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah,
I do want to make sure that they at least look at the minimal performance standard too. Kind of the ham sandwich thing, that we're not funding everything in one category.
Did people hear that? No. Commissioner, minimal performance standards, take a look at that, and there were some good issues raised around that in the exec committee meeting.
We'll add that to the list.
Member Barber?
Thank you. Just one more thing. I think that in general, when we're talking about the differences in scoring from this time to prior times, the scoring wasn't that different. TAB shows a different funding scenario. And so I think that is really, so I would say, before we go too far in the weeds and reevaluating scoring, we set up priorities for scoring a few cycles ago, and we've kind of stuck with those basically. Last year, we had a different amount of money available, and then the carbon funding on top of it, and then TAB as a whole chose a different funding scenario. So to me, it's a little bit of a nuance, but an important one as to what we look at.
Member Geisler?
Mr. Chair, I think it's important, though, to realize that how we allocate scores. And so if we, for instance, take points from one area and move them into safety-focused projects will get funded versus other projects. And so this is how we decide what is most important in the projects that get submitted. Because also the higher points, the higher scored areas will get more focus from agencies that submit, because that's how you win, right? That's how you go up the stack, is get more points. So this is the most direct way we can influence specific projects that are entering into the process without knowing the project itself. So I know it seems really extracted, but how we allocate those points really does depend on what we see within a given mode category, and then the funding allotments between the buckets is obviously how much money we want to allocate to a given mode. But we can influence specific priorities within every category: roads, transit, bike, if we so choose.
Yeah, thanks for that explanation. Member Barnes?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this is about the time when we're in the executive meeting, when I won't go through as long, but I do think, when we talk about the categories, we're talking about points, and we may be able to just have it where it still stays from, the tweaking the points from the money that's allocated, minus the fact that maybe as a group, we could take some money off the top and say, we want to be able to influence certain areas, and there's different things, from IIJA grants is what I'm going to get to, because we talked about where we used to have 200 million. This last time was 300, now it's 250. That's talking about money that came in direct allocation. That's not saying any of the grants that are out there, how to leverage, areas to, and again, when I brought it up, it could range from having money off the top that could go from helping with an application, if things, even having a simple way of bringing in projects to see how they would rank, just in a scoring. From a MnDOT perspective, we have a consultant that looks at a number of projects. Now, these are more around the roadway types of projects that we've been doing. But again, from a TAB perspective, what do we want to do as a group to be leveraging more for grants, not just the money coming in? And again, that could be a whole different subject, so I don't want to go completely on that, but it could mean where there's some changes where from the solicitation, or it could keep it where it's simple and again, it's money off the top, that there's something set aside to do some things for the categories. Because I know like our last, when we were actually talking through projects and the group was having a lot of good discussions, it seems like there's, you know, there's like competing side of things, when in reality, we could maybe make some more progress in the areas that we would like to by, again, leveraging, you know, our dollars. And I know afterwards, Amy mentioned that there's actually some legislation that's going through that is some general funds that may be able to match on some of those grants. So it'd be good to probably find out more, and then maybe that covers all of it, and we're good to go. But I just think we have some, maybe, you know, the IIJA grants has still got almost 4 years left, and I think there's a lot of local entities that would probably like to leverage some more, and maybe we can't do anything, but we haven't had the discussion, I guess, whether as a group or presentation.
I'm glad you brought that up. It was an important part of our executive committee discussion today. So you think about this, we've got, let's say, an extra $50 million coming to the region, and if memory serves me right, on the IIJA, what was it, 1.2 trillion, 40% of it, a lot of it was formula funds, like we're getting to the region, continuation of that, but what about this sort of new money coming to the region? Might we think about taking some of that, as Mike says, off the top, Member Barnes says, off the top, and set that aside just for now and say, well, gee, some of these counties, cities, the region may be applying for some of these federal funds for grants, and we might want to be a matching partner to some degree on some of these things that are occurring in cities, counties, or in the region. And if it doesn't, to Member Geisler's point that he made in the exec, and that was if it doesn't work out, we just roll it back into the solicitation, and then use it like we did the last time with that innovation money we couldn't figure out what to do with. So, yeah, one more complication, but really one more opportunity. Really quite a fabulous opportunity that nobody really understands that well yet. So this IIJA now has been around for, what, about a year? And people still don't understand what the opportunities are in there. Whether you're local government, county government, you know, the cities, Bloomberg Philanthropies has set up a hub for cities to be able to go to understand, well, what's possibly there for a city to get in terms of a grant opportunity. We talked about it, the counties don't think that something's set up like that nationally. But here we've got an opportunity in our region to think about, well, maybe we should create our own little hub and just park a little bit of money off this next solicitation and see what the opportunities are that get developed through consultants like MnDOT's using, and decide if there's a particular category, whether it's public safety or greenhouse gas reduction or expansion of capacity, bridge improvements, whatever it might be, that we can be a little bit more flexible on use of some of these funds. So that's some more food for thought for you for the next meeting, and then we're going to try to get Mike's consultant here, MnDOT's consultant here, to tell us a little bit about what they think are some of the opportunities next time around. So Member Geisler, back to the point that you were making, where does that potentially take us in terms of a conversation? What are you thinking about? You know, that we could still have a discussion that had some substance to it and some logical outcome relative to the 2024 solicitation.
I mean, I think with respect to connecting our thoughts, as Steve mentioned, we already have some of it. I think we can refine it and clarify it and make it easy for TAB members to understand where the point allocation goes. I think from the off-the-top perspective for facilitating the grant side of things, you know, it sounds like a way to put a little bit of seed money to get a whole lot of return potential. There's some risk there but we can mitigate that by turning it back. All of those items I think will help us make better governance decisions ahead of time. And, you know, if you look through the comments, there was a lot of commentary about parochial, and we were making decisions after we see the projects and all that. And I think that will all facilitate better governance on the front end. You know, I am always for information sharing too. I think the more you know about where to go for funding, you know, MPCA bringing the Volkswagen settlement funds here has delivered a whole lot of conversation. The more things we can do with that for the region, the more money comes here, the better it is for everybody.
What are some overarching principles relative to 2024 now? I think we got time on 2026, but relative to 2024, where people want to approach it seriously and not just say, well, okay, we're just, because of the time involved, we're just going to do what we did last time. What way could we be helpful to you from sort of a 50,000-foot level in terms of guidance that could then trickle down into some scoring suggestions from the technical people? You know, if the tab said, okay, we'd like a little emphasis here, a little emphasis there, what would be helpful?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Elaine, I'm thinking about our presentation tomorrow to F&P. Many of those topic areas perhaps were more technical. They were, you know, a lot of people had questions about the rules. We discussed a long time about, we have a lot of complicated rules about BRT and HZIP and other things. So we'll take care of that at the technical level. But I think the policy area is more of the scoring.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
We've got the scoring matrix.
Yeah.
So tomorrow we've got this whole scoring matrix, which you saw now, 18 months ago, but that shows exactly how the points are laid out on a few pages, and you can clearly see where what the value of the region is for all the application categories. And so I think this group spending time on that is the best use of our time, probably.
Well, could you distill that into, I'm trying to think about how to be efficient between now and the next meeting. So that, could you send out like a survey that would be, here's the way we allocate points, here's the different categories, and people could move things around, and they say, well, if I were deciding, here's what I would suggest, that we have a little more emphasis on this versus that, or, and then we look for some thoughts that way. Member Martinson.
So that reminds me of the fact that we, not a few months ago, saw some results from an effort that staff went through here to collect exactly that sort of feedback from the community that was, I thought, really quite creative and well done. So we should probably revisit taking a look at those results too.
Member Geisler.
Sure.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. I could see even abstracting it of, let's stop talking about we have 1,100 points to allocate, let's force rank. The concept of system, the concept of this, what is your order 1 through 10 that you think is the most important, or 1 through 6, or whatever the pieces are, because then it becomes a little more policy governance of like, we think this is the most important thing for this category, and then we can talk about does the resultant match how we're currently allotting points? Because if we find a gap where the largest points is in the spot that it's maybe the bottom of the list, probably not this place where we want to score higher. That would give us a little more statement and a little less 5 points here, 10 points here, 5, it's not so much that.
Right, sure. That's what I want to avoid too, but just maybe some more high-level guidance.
Governing statements.
If you get it from everybody in that kind of categorization, you can figure out how to structure it.
There's probably, Mr. Chair, there's probably no reason Elaine can't send out in the next couple of days how the scoring's allocated right now without having to dig through all the application materials. In 4 pages, we'll give you those tables, and then you'll have a month to think about it.
Yeah, good. I like the idea of giving folks time to think about it. Okay. Elaine? Yeah, thanks for...
And just for give a background, when we did the solicitation from 2012 to 2014 in development, TAB members and with the council members sat down and had workshops and did that exact exercise, which is how they came up with the weighting for each of the criteria, and then sent those criteria to the technical committees to come up with the measures under each of those. So that would be a way of looking at it again. So, and we do have a summary of those points in our introduction solicitation, so, and that also has that same table with, so I can send that out to all of you.
Okay, good. All right. I don't know if we helped or hurt, Steve. I mean, you,
Gave us more work, but that's okay.
you're still standing, and you're still the same height as when you came up to the podium.
That's right. No, thanks for your input.
All
Appreciate
right,
that.
okay, thanks. Well, good discussion, and we're going to get out of here earlier, but actually, you guys have been running over time-wise, so we're going to finish up a little bit early and capture some of the last time from other meetings. Anybody else have any issues that they want to raise or items of other tab members?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just a quick one, since
Member
we're doing
Johnson.
the legislative session. One thing that came up in the theme for the comments, and I think it came up a lot with just the transfer back to in-person meetings, is the challenge of everyone being able to get here. And so I was wondering if there's any position from TAB, or if there's any sort of conversation we can have about changing the open meeting law, to be blunt, because it does restrict us, and again, people are talking about, their commutes in, and it's very, very challenging. So I was just curious if there's any discussion that's been happening at the executive board or any place else about that.
Yeah, good question. This has been raised repeatedly by all of us that are sensitive to everybody's schedule. And we've asked, I think, over at the legislature to get something done about it. And has your governmental affairs person requested a change in the law?
Not that I know of. I thought League of Cities was going to, and I know Metro Cities was going to let me know if there was, and I've been kind of trying to keep track, and I have not seen a bill to change it.
How many, no, you haven't seen anything yet?
There was one change that was made, but it did not change anything that would affect the board here. It was on,
Okay.
during the emergency measures, if you had a health concern, it took out the wording if it was during an emergency, but that still didn't change anything for the body at
Yeah.
large.
Member Johnson, thanks for raising this issue again, because this is, I mean, with 1,000 bills introduced in the first month, it would have been nice to have been in there with that initial batch, but Member Foster.
Yeah, my understanding is that anything that has been put forward has been specifically around the legislature and not the broader state.
So do we know whether Metro Cities or anybody else has even crafted a bill?
When I talked with Metro City staff, they said they wouldn't be the lead. They were going to support whatever League of Minnesota Cities did, because that covered the
All
full
right.
state.
So, Mayor Bailey, do you know anything about what the league is doing?
Yeah, I'm not aware of the league. I can follow up with Patty, though, just to see what the status is. But we were assuming that the League of Minnesota Cities was going to be the sponsor, if you will, and we would obviously sign on or support it.
Would you try to do that as soon as possible? Because if they're not doing anything on it, then I think we could ask the Met Council lawyers to craft something, and then we can figure out who can sponsor it, because this is really an important issue for us to go to a hybrid meeting, I think.
Absolutely, will do.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Good point there, Member Johnson. Thanks for bringing that up. Anything else?
Sure.
All right, we're gonna wait. Member Schember, no report on where you've already biked across the United States once.
Think more north to
West
south.
to east.
Think more north to south on dirt roads and single track.
Oh, okay, well, we'll wait for your itinerary.
In the planning stages, as Member Barnes would say.
All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right, there's some enthusiasm.
Wonder why.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.